Hello, this is Rochelle Agatha, and this is the lecture on process costing for managerial accounting, which is Chapter 5. So up till this point, you've gone through quite a bit of information. You did an introduction to managerial accounting. We talked about building blocks and job costing. And now we are working our way through activity costing, and now we're into process costing. So the first objective is to distinguish between the flow of cost in process costing and job costing. Process costing benefits are your ability to look at cost trends, budget to actual, pricing, and financial statements. So there's a lot of things that you'll be able to look at. And this is a good little picture where you can see that you have your centers process. Then if you're looking at shells process, packaging process to get a total cost of just a simple food type item. What are the differences between job and process costing? Job cost systems are individual job cost records. They take into account direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, and they assign that to individual jobs. The cost of your finished goods flow into finished goods inventory. The cost of sold jobs flow out of finished good inventory and into cost of goods sold. So here's a picture. Direct materials, direct labor, manufacturing overhead goes into your work in process or progress and your jobs to get your finished goods and then your cost of goods sold. So these slides, it's good to print them out or to make flashcards. Once again, you'll find that beneficial. Job costing and process costing differences. Process cost systems is a series of manufacturing processes. Cost per process is accumulated and moved from one process to another process. Cost transferred to finished good inventory only from the work in process inventory of the last manufacturing process. When units are sold, cost is transferred out of finished goods and into cost of goods sold. So here's this picture. So here's all of your material inventory, your wages, and your manufacturing overhead. Goes into your different processes, and then that total amount goes into finished goods and then into cost of goods sold. The building blocks of process costing are conversion costs, which are direct labor plus manufacturing overhead. Then you work with your equivalent units and your inventory flow assumptions. So we're going to talk about these areas. Your inventory flow assumptions included a weighted average and FIFO, which is not covered in this textbook. It's a financial accounting topic. Objective 2 is computing equivalent units. The building blocks of process costing need equivalent units. Equivalent units are the amount of work done during a period in terms of fully complete units of output. So you might have to print these out and really think about what I'm saying as you read the chapter or reread the chapter. A lot of words here. The building blocks of process costing also include inventory flow assumptions because you must make those assumptions. So you learn these in financial accounting. You had weighted average, FIFO, which isn't covered here. Weighted average is typical. Most accounting systems use it, and as you remember from financial accounting, it is the easier methodology. Then you look at the cost-benefit standpoint. Objective 3 wants you to talk about the use process costing in the first production department. How does process costing work? Using the weighted average assumption, as I mentioned earlier, there are 5 steps to process costing. You summarize the flow of physical units. You compute output in terms of equivalent units. You summarize total costs to account for. Compute the cost per equivalent unit. And assign total cost to units completed and to units in ending work in process. So put your math hat on, try not to get too hung up on the words and follow the math, and you'll see that it isn't that complicated. Okay, here are your units. You had no beginning inventory, no work in progress. You started 50,000 production units, so you have 50,000 units to account for. You completed and transferred out 40,000, so you had 10,000 at the end. There's your 50,000 to account for. So let me go through the little, that's what I just mentioned up there. What happened to the units? Are they finished or still in process? So if you're looking at Exhibit 5.5 on page 264 in your book, that's where I'm going along here. So let's do S5-4. In the problem, they give you beginning work in process, and then you started production. They didn't give you total physical units. They didn't give you what was completed or transferred out, but they gave you the ending. So this is math. It's like a word problem. Add the beginning plus started gives you total to account for. And then you know your total to account for is calculated up there. These two must tie, the 141. So you're going to back into what was completed and transferred out, which is the difference between the 141 and the 28,000. So like I said, it's a math problem. Get out Excel or your calculator and a piece of paper and make sure you can do the math. And all these problems are going to be set up the same way. Now going back to Exhibit 5.5 where we just ended a moment ago, here's your 40,000 transferred out and your 10 ending, so you know you had an equivalent unit of 50,000. In step 2, you talk about conversion cost, which in Exhibit 5.5 they tell you that 10,000 units each were 25% complete, so you have 2,500 units, leaving you with total equivalent units in the conversion cost column if you're looking at Exhibit 5-5. So let's do that in S5-6. Here were your completed and transferred out units, your ending work in process, so your total units to account for are 1,185,000. As you're looking at the direct material and the conversion cost, you must look at the information in the chapter to show you what percent of the conversion cost was left in the ending work in process. So turn to your book and look at S5-6, and they tell you that that there were the 62% had been on its way through the conversion process. Okay, going back to Exhibit 5-7, here you have your direct material and your conversion costs and your total. So if you're looking at Exhibit 5-7, you can see the information in the actual exhibit. So you summarize the direct materials, the conversion, giving you total cost to account for. Let's do S5-7. In S5-7, they give you certain information. They give you the amount of information that you need to fill in the chart. Okay, so there you go there. So if you're looking at it, they talk about how the process inventory count had 63,000 in beginning balance. 42 of this related to direct materials, which is here. 21,000 related to conversion, so there's your 63. Then they give you the cost added during April, which is there. And then they tell you that they give you the manufacturing overhead also. So in Exhibit 5-8, you compute the cost per equivalent unit. So looking at Exhibit 5-8 in your book, they give you total cost of direct materials and conversion, and they give you the equivalent units, and you just divide them, and that gives you the cost per equivalent unit. So once again, it's just a math problem. It's being able to read the problems and pick the information out and place it in the right spot. So as you're doing your homework, I would print these slides out or make some flashcards, and you'll find your homework will be much easier to do. In Exhibit 5-9, that's where you have to use the information times the unit. So if you previously calculated the $2.80 and the 160, now they're giving you the direct materials, and you do the math, and you get a total of 176,000. Then they give you the direct material units in ending work in process, and they give you the conversion cost in the conversion units in ending work in process. So you multiply the two steps out, and you have your total cost of ending work in process, and you add the two together, and you get total cost accounted for. In S5-10 is the next one we're going to cover. They ask you to determine the total cost that should be assigned to the following: units completed and transferred out. So they give you the direct material and the conversion cost dollars, and then you have the units provided. So you do the math, and you get units completed and transferred out. Then they ask you for units ending work in process. So once again, they provide the units, and you must do the math in pieces, and that gives you your units ending work in process cost. And then the total cost is the sum of the two added together. So follow these steps. Once again, print this out so you have something to look at when you're doing the assignment. And then what's the average cost is you take the two amounts that were provided, the 5 and the 225, and the average is 725. Sustainability and process costing employs lean and green practices, efficient, environmentally friendly, question mark, and many parties benefit. So you kind of have to ask yourself these questions when you look at process costing versus sustainability. S5-8 talks about total cost to account for divided by the total equivalent units is your cost per unit. So once again, you're going to take the information provided, divide by the equivalent units, and get your cost per unit. Objective 4 is to prepare the journal entries. So we're following our managerial accounting through our knowledge of financial accounting. Process costing is similar to job order system, except for the manufacturing costs are assigned to the process departments rather than the jobs. And at the end of the month, a journal entry must be made. So here's an example where direct materials were requisitioned for use by Department 1. So here you take your work in process is debited and your direct materials are credited. Okay, this is the materials for Department 1. Now you talk about the journal entries used. The labor time records show that 21,250 of direct labor was used in Department 1 during October. So here you're going to journalize the wages payable against the work in process for Department 1. And then the manufacturing overhead is allocated to the department using the company's predetermined overhead rate. And they give you the predetermined overhead rate is $50 per machine hour. And the department used 935 hours. So 935 times 50 is your work in process and your manufacturing overhead. So what I would do is set up the standard journal entries you would make on flashcards, and on the back write this example and flip through them. It'll make this much easier to understand as you do your homework. Here's T accounts. I love T accounts. T accounts are other ways to make flashcards. Here's your direct materials. Here's your direct labor. Here's your manufacturing overhead. And then you credit the total out of Department 1. And here's your journal entry here. So this is a nice slide to study from, showing you the T account versus the journal entry. And if you're looking for some basic refresher on T accounts and journal entries, feel free to go on to my website, to the Accounting 201 page, and watch some of those lectures if you need a refresher. Now let's do E5-28A. It relies on information from 27A, but they provide it in the book in this problem. So here's your journal entry to record your direct materials used by blending. So read the problem. Then you're going to record your direct labor used in blending. And then you're going to record your manufacturing overhead allocated to blending. So here's your 3 work in process debits, and your credits come from inventory, labor, and manufacturing overhead. And then the average cost from E527A they give you is $1 per gallon. So you're transferring 6,600 gallons. So here's your work in process going from blending to packaging. And here is your T account. So once again, the total debit left in work in process inventory is 1963 after all the pieces are moved through work in process. Objective 5 is use process costing in a second or later production department. Okay, so remember we did Department 1. If you do another department, it's the same 5 steps. You include cost of units transferred in when calculating the equivalent units. You do your transferred in costs. So here you go. So you had your beginning work in process transferred in. Then you have your total physical units to account for, what was completed, and what the ending is. And once again, it's the same calculation as you move from department to department. Here's a similar example, 5-12 for Department 2. So you're doing it the same way. Go to Exhibit 5-12 and make sure you can follow these details before you start your homework. And then Exhibit 5-13 summarizes and has you compute the cost, the equivalent unit cost. So follow the information through, get your beginning cost, cost added, cost to account for, divided by the equivalent unit is the cost per equivalent unit. Your transferred in, your direct materials, and your conversion costs equal your total process cost. And here's your calculation of the units completed, moving on to ending work in process inventory. Notice you had to do the transferred in, the direct materials, and the conversion costs separately times their individual unit costs. And that's the end of chapter 5. So please watch it as many times as you need to. Make flashcards, print out the slides, study it really well before you start your homework. Thank you.